Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for showing up and supporting. My name is Farah Lewis and I serve as a case manager and human trafficking lead advocate under the Trafficking Awareness and Prevention Program with Family and Community Resources. I want to begin by thanking my fellow panelists for their dedication and insight, and the Stoughton community for coming together tonight. Parents, providers, everyday people with a shared commitment to safeguarding our homes and our children. While human trafficking is a heavy and complex topic, our power lies not in silence, but in conversation. I've seen firsthand how trafficking hides in plain sight, even in towns that feel safe. But I've also seen what's possible when communities choose to see, to believe, and to act. So my hope tonight is that we not only walk away more informed, but more equipped, more connected, and more compassionate. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this space, and I'm going to welcome Jasmine Grace to share her story. Thank you.
Hey, I am so sorry that I was late. I'm on the struggle bus for sure, the allergies, the whole thing, so if I sound congested, coming from New Hampshire was a whole ordeal, and my kids and all the things. So anyways, I am thrilled to be here. Thank you for asking me to come and inviting me and share my story. And it just is great to have a conversation because it's a small group. So I'm going to give you a whole lot of information. I hope it leaves you informed, inspired, gives hope. But feel free to ask questions because we have plenty of time. So when we think about sex trafficking, what are some thoughts or ideas that come to your mind? Have you, because I don't know how educated you are about trafficking, so I'm trying to understand.
Chinatown, 3 o'clock in the morning, these guys got these young girls, and I'm like,
Yeah. So, right. So, okay. So you're on the right track, right? That grooming, the control. What else? What are some other thoughts? Yep. 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 Not to put you on the spot. Any ideas? Very good, exactly. Okay, so sex trafficking definitely has all those types of elements. When you think of prostitution, just the word prostitution, does it give you a different vibe or thought?
Yeah, first thing is like, oh, you're running around. That's the first thing.
Okay,
That's how I grew up thinking.
all right. What else?
the way I first thought, prostitution, that's what they want, that's all on them, but I don't think that way anymore. I think that,
Some,
more than that.
right,
They don't want to
necessarily.
get for it.
Right, exactly. So, okay, I'm in my 40s. I grew up watching Pretty Woman, right? So that was very suggested that Julia Roberts chose this, and this was her choice, and this was empowering, and she loved this. And then this guy comes along and rescues her out of that life. And I always joke and say, Richard Gere never showed up in a Lamborghini and put a string of pearls around my neck in the 8 years I was in the commercial sex trade. And so that's the different streams of influence, right? We have the movies, entertainment, music, media, our own vulnerability growing up. Are you familiar with the ACE score, Adverse Childhood Experience? It's really important when you think about vulnerabilities because the younger we are and the more childhood trauma we experience, the more vulnerable and at risk we are later in life for things like addiction, substance use, mental health, trafficking, jails, etc., right? So my ACE score is only a 4, meaning I don't have a big ACE score. I am a big mess. I don't have a high ACE score because I wasn't sexually abused as a child, which prostitution research says that 80 to 90% of women who end up in the commercial sex trade have been sexually abused, right? So that dial's already been turned. I didn't experience domestic violence at the home. I didn't experience substance abuse. I had 2 parents who are still married. My mom actually just passed away. but she suffered severely with mental illness. And my dad worked all the time to provide for the family, so he wasn't there. And so I raised myself, essentially, right? And I grew up on the North Shore. You hear the accent, right, from Riviera Saugus area, a big Italian Catholic family. And all my extended family were alcoholics, addicts. I had an uncle who owned a strip club in the combat zone, all types of dysfunction. So I really didn't have a chance, but I knew I didn't dream of becoming a prostitute, right? That wasn't something on my list. I had dreams, I had goals, and I wanted to do other things, but I was young, I was naive, I was vulnerable. And what is the number one need that all humans have? Okay, but deeper, a little deeper than that. Right. Correct, right? And so not experiencing that at home, unfortunately, I looked for it in all the wrong places. And I wanted to be, you know, a hairdresser, a veterinarian. I had dreams, I had goals. I went to a vocational high school, and I graduated 18, became a hairdresser, worked at a small hair salon, went to community college. But I was always in relationships that were unhealthy. And I was always choosing boys that were unsafe and dangerous. And I was spelling love, S-E-X, right? Because I didn't know that's not what we were supposed to do. And if I wasn't giving it, they took it. So I did experience sexual violence as a teen, but I didn't have anywhere to put that. Anyone helped me process that. So what happens when we experience those things? We have shame. And shame makes our identity a certain way. And we start to make choices based out of that, right? So that made sense why I didn't have self-confidence, self-worth. I had a lot of shame. Again, never dreamt of becoming a prostitute, but I just saw myself out of that lens, and I always settled for less. Makes sense, right? And so at 19, I'm at the nightclub, partying, drinking with my friends, underage drinking. Of course, I used to go to the Palace. If you ever came up to the North Shore, you'd remember the Palace. Did you do that before you were a cop, I hope?
I did.
Okay.
Good place at the time.
And they even designed it where like the men were 21 and the women were under 21. Obviously, I didn't recognize that then. And we were all there partying, drinking, hanging out. And a guy that knows some friends of mine brings me to the bar and buys me a drink. And he spends $7, and I'm impressed. Like, that's all it took, not much. And he was handsome, and he had a wad of cash, and bling, and he was dressed nice, and I was interested. I was like, ooh, who's this guy? And so the way we think about trafficking a lot of times is like the movie Taken, right? Or the kidnapping, the force. That happens, right? Victims are definitely kidnapped. I've worked with women who are held in those storage pod containers on people's lawns. I actually work with a woman who's in her 30s who's been trafficked by her father since she's been 10. The father sent her to the partner's house when she was 10, and they trained her and beat her and abused her for over a month. And that mental coercion, still trapped in that life, and she's in her 30s. And she has an 8-year-old son, and she's a school aide in the day. She works in a school, and at night or on the weekends, they text her, and she goes and does whatever she's supposed to do. She's not handcuffed, she's not beaten, she's not kidnapped. She's in mental and emotional bondage. That's where it is. And that's her father, right? So she's trauma bonded and everything else. And the father shows up for every special event at the school and just sits in the audience, right, to keep that control and that fear. He's taken pictures of her, doing criminal things. He's made her engage in criminal things. She's been to the hospital more times than I can count. She has whore, unfortunately, carved into her stomach. I mean, he's tortured her, and he continues to torture her still. And I'm just a support for her. I just do a lot of listening, you know, and every now and then I'll chime in and tell her there's a better way. But, you know, I really just try to do a lot of listening. So generally, trafficking is happening with people in relationship. They know each other. And this guy became my boyfriend, and he would really play that boyfriend role, get me to love and trust him. And he showed up a few days later. We exchanged numbers in his champagne-colored Mercedes-Benz. And again, I was young, I was naive, I was interested, and there was plenty of red flags. Like, he was probably a drug dealer, right? Because the typical story, you know, and to have a trafficking situation, what do you need? A trafficker, a victim, and a buyer. And we're all coming out of this broken system, and we think traffickers and buyers think it's okay to sell victims, and buyers think it's okay to purchase them, and the victim is really just looking for a need to get met. And they spot that need and that vulnerability, and that this is how they're going to exploit it. And so he was from the inner city of Boston, Dorchester, Roxbury, didn't have a father. He kind of was the breadwinner of the family. and single mother, and he like sold guns and drugs for a living. And he was being taught rules of the game by older pimps and traffickers who were like, you can do a lot more with a girl than you can drugs. It's a lot easier because you can sell her over and over again compared to drugs, where you get pulled over on the highway with a trunk full of cocaine, you obviously go to jail right away. But if you get pulled over with a woman in the car, it's a lot less obvious. And so a lot of times your father's a pimp, your uncle, your cousin, and men aren't always the traffickers, right? Women are too. I work with women whose mothers were their first exploiters. The mother's poor, she has a drug addiction, she trades the daughter. Very common. I work with those women too. But my story is your typical story, where he was a male and he was a drug dealer, and there were plenty of red flags, but I ignored them, and I was intrigued, and I started dating this guy. And again, our culture, our society, the music industry, all that is glorified. You know, the hip hop, rap culture, etc. And we're dating, and he meets my parents. He comes over for Christmas, Thanksgiving. There's pictures of us in front of my mom's Christmas tree. And at the same time, he's getting to know me, he's grooming me, right? He's getting me to love and trust him, take me out to dinner, shopping, buying me things. But he's planting seeds of doubt at the same time. Why would you want to go to school for journalism? That's stupid. Why would you want to work at a hair salon? You can own one. Here's a way we can make a lot of money. And you can have a family and a business and anything that you want. And the kicker always is, you're having sex anyways, you might as well get paid for it. And I was like, not really interested, really on the fence, but I wanted him to love me and I wanted to please him. But if my A score was already a 10, how much grooming do you think he'd have to do? Not much, right? Because I'm already exposed to a severe childhood trauma, and this has become normalized. And so how about the young girl that runs away from the group home, the foster home, and she's approached by a trafficker, and he's promising to take care of her and have all her needs met, and that seems a whole lot better than going back to this place where they're all abusing me for free. You can see that. And so, again, I'm not thrilled about this idea, but he's grooming, he's manipulating, I'm not recognizing it, and I happen to have a best friend who gets involved in the lifestyle, but I just think she has a new boyfriend. I don't know the whole deal. I get invited to a college party, Salem State University, and all the boys are drinking in the dorm. And they tell me that a stripper is going to come for the entertainment. And this is the other thing. Our culture is saturated with, commercial sex all day, every day. And yes, today it's way worse, right, because of the devices, and we hand children these devices. We're not paying attention. I actually know a sex therapist whose youngest client is 6. This little girl has been exposed to porn since she's been 2. Right, and the chemicals in her brain are changed. She thinks it's okay to have sex with anyone at any time. And you can thank Instagram and then OnlyFans. Like, you don't even need a pimp today, right? Like, the internet is actually the pimp, right? Because OnlyFans comes and says, hey, take those provocative half-naked pictures off of Instagram and come post them over here and get a subscription base and a lot of followers, and you'll make a lot of money. And these young girls do it. Then they're in college and they're exposed to this. I even work with a woman who's currently in jail, and her trafficker still posts all her images on OnlyFans and makes tons of money while she's incarcerated. Like, it's just insane the way social media plays a role today. But back then, like, porn was something you had to go looking for. Like, to find dirty magazines, you had to go look under the bed or in the closet, like in the back. Right, today, it's just everywhere, all day, movies, TV, you guys know them. I don't have to explain it, how over-sexualized everything is. And so these boys are telling me the stripper's coming. I think nothing of it. That's fine. She goes to walk in to entertain us, and it's my best friend. And I didn't know that she got involved in this lifestyle. So we cry, and we ruin the party. They kick us out. And I go back home to my boyfriend. I tell him what happened, and don't you know, he knows her trafficker. Takes me to her house. She lives in Chestnut Hill, right? It's nice, expensive, affluent area. You'd never think a trafficker lives there with all his girls. And this is considered his stable. And he has his own room, she has her own room, but the other ones, they share a room because there's so many of them. And the home is big and beautiful. There's a Range Rover and a BMW in the driveway. And we come in and, she's telling me that's her man. She's using all regular language, right? That's my man. And yeah, I go to the bachelor parties and I go to this massage parlor and I work. And everything that I make, I give him, and he buys me anything that I want. And sure enough, I go in her room, she has clothes, shoes, Louis Vuitton bags, like the epitome of success, right, at 19. And she looks like she has it all together. She's not handcuffed to a radiator, she's not beaten, she's not drugged, and I'm like, okay, right, maybe it's not that bad. And then she tells me how to hustle. You do this least amount of work, you make that amount of money, and it's not that bad, and all this stuff. So What are those three elements of trafficking? Force, fraud, and coercion. The hardest ones to recognize are the fraud and the coercion. Obviously, the force is very recognizable, but if you come from an abusive background, that's normalized too. And so he didn't use that on me at first, right? The force didn't come until later. And so he really used that finesse and get me to love and trust him. You have to think of it like this, like it's, trafficking happens by being targeted, groomed, isolated, exploited. It's just like this method that kind of works. And so he sends me down to Hartford, Connecticut to this massage parlor. This was when, 20 years ago when massage parlors were really popular, American. Now you're going to have Asian massage parlors, which obviously is a whole nother conversation about those poor victims that are there. They don't speak the language, all their documents are taken away, they're under extreme force and coercion, lots of debt to pay back, lots of shame involved in it. But today, everything's online, and you can still go to massage parlors or brothels in Nevada, where prostitution is legal, and women victims are still trafficked through the legal system. I definitely don't believe prostitution should be legalized. But I say to him, okay, if I want to stop, can I? And he says, of course you can. So I'm sent down to Hartford. I get buzzed up by the big bouncer at the door, and I have a duffel bag full of condoms, baby wipes, high heel stilettos, skimpy dress. And right away, the woman who owns the place, she says, okay, what's your name? What's your work name? And I wish, obviously, I had been educated. But clearly, I wouldn't have got involved if I was. But at the core of it, it's identity disturbance. The name gets changed. That's your work name. And then you have to be someone different for every single buyer. That is so exhausting, right? Because every buyer wants something else in their own sick and perverted different way. Some are decent, some are horrific. It's a huge scale. And you sit in this little nasty brothel, everything's sticky and like grimy feeling that you sit on these little couches, fake leather couches, and it's dark and it's musty, and it's on the top floor, hidden in plain sight, right in the busy finance district. People walking by all day, Hartford, downtown, no one has any idea what's going on behind closed doors. And so the men come in, pay a door fee, and they come in the lounge, and they get to scan the room and hand the girl a ticket. And then you go back, they're supposed to shower and change and come back into the hallway where there's 8 or 9 rooms, and there's a mattress and a nightstand. And that's where you do what you have to do. And the first time I exchanged myself, I wasn't prepared. I mean, I was completely sober, so, my mind completely clear. And in order to engage, my body disassociated naturally. My body, like if we flick the switch. He could have been my grandfather. I was horrified. I was disgusted. I remember a lot of details, but I don't remember the act because I was gone somewhere else. And once it was finally over, I come back and I realize I have money in my hand, and I just try to focus on that. And that's the thing, all that money running through your hand gives you a false sense of power and a false sense of security, and you just try to focus on the money. Imagine if you're coming from poverty, you've never seen a $50 bill in your life, and then all of a sudden, it starts to make you feel powerful and in control. I had a quota to make. My trafficker told me I wasn't allowed to come out of each session without less than $100 or $80, and I had to stay there for a couple days in a row, 2 or 3 days in a row, stayed at a little nasty motel next door from 10 a.m. to 1 a.m. That's a long day of being sexually exploited. And he finally comes back, picks me up, and we come back home. He lived in Cambridge, which was another red flag, with his mother. If he was such a hustler, why did he still live with his mother? I, again, clearly went over all the red flags. And we get out of the car, and I have a pocket full of money. And he puts out his hand. And I knew that gesture meant to hand over the money, but I start logically thinking, why would I give you all the money? You weren't there. Wait, you my boyfriend, you my pimp. Like, I felt really confused. I felt gross. I felt ashamed and disgusted. And he just stares at me and says, is there going to be a problem? And I was like, no. And I hand it over. And I feel like at that moment, as I look back, I lost my voice. I lost my courage. I was full of shame, disgust, confusion. I go back home to my parents' house, and I go back to college. I go back to the hair salon, and I'm trying to live a double life. Every few days, I disappear and get sent to Connecticut. No one's paying attention to me as a kid, never mind a 19-year-old. So no one's asking questions, but my friends are kind of wondering about my new boyfriend, and I'm lying. I'm living this double life, and I can't stand it. So after a few weeks, I start to speak up and change my mind, and that's when he uses violence as to keep me under his control. We're coming home from Connecticut. I'm driving. I say something he doesn't like. I was always known to be out of pocket, the term they use, big mouth Italian. I can't help it. He was just trying to beat me into submission, you know, all the time. But he backhands me, this side of my head hits the glass, I can't see, I see stars, I pull over, he proceeds to pull me out of the car, beat me on the side of the highway. And the other dude who was in the back pulled him off of me, threw me in the back seat, and I just cried the whole way home to Boston, because that's when I recognized, oh crap, right, what did I get myself into? Like, everything changes when someone starts putting their hands on you. I wasn't raised in that type of environment. My dad doesn't even raise his voice, never even swears. I mean, I just had never been hit like that. And before I know it, my life is completely engulfed. And I don't want to make you think that you have to cross state lines or go anywhere to be trafficked, because that's not true. You can be trafficked out of your own home. You don't have to leave your city, your town. But bringing me over to Connecticut was probably about 3 months or so. And he was doing that on purpose because the streets were getting cleaned up in Boston, right? So the combat zone downtown was getting cleaned up. Prostitution was just being pushed indoors, right? It's not the world's oldest profession, a lot of us say. It's really the world's oldest oppression, because those women were being trafficked back then in the 70s and in 60s and the 80s. You know, you think of the pimps with the alligator shoes and the feather in the hat, like that was trafficking. We just didn't have a word for it until the year 2000, when the TVPA, Trafficking Victims Protection Act, came out. Then we started talking about it. But if you but if you think about domestic violence, how long that took to be popularized, now we're like probably 50, 60 years in, we're all educated and understand what domestic violence is. That's kind of where we are with trafficking. We're only 25 years in, if you really think about it. And so streets were getting cleaned up, pushed indoors to these brothels, and I'm completely isolated. I'm living with him. I'm considered his bottom bitch. I'm sorry, that's a term they use. I have to cook, clean, do the laundry, do everything he tells me to do. It's all controlled. And again, I wasn't handcuffed to a radiator, but I was in mental and emotional bondage. And I was completely struggling with this situation and being in it. And every time I try to run away, he'd come badger me and manipulate me and cry and show up with diamonds. Just like domestic violence, you know, all the ways abusers keep that power and control, but on steroids, because of the shame that I'm feeling for the exploitation. And then he would sit me down for hours on end. You're a no good, dirty prostitute. No one loves you. No one will marry you. And he'd say all these things to me, and that became my identity, because the commercial sex trade also validated his words. I felt no good. I felt dirty. I felt disgusting. No one was going to marry me. And so that became who I was. I was fed the lie. I bought it. I believed it. And I was trapped under him for 5 years. I was also brought up to another massage parlor in Kittery, Maine. You could Google it. It was pretty infamous. It was called the Danish Health Club. It was in business about 30 years. And the way you actually were exploited there was you went to real massage therapy school in New Hampshire somewhere. You went to this class for however many weeks. You got taught real massage therapy techniques. And at the end, you had a sealed envelope, which was apparently your certificate. And you took that and all the cash and you brought it to the lawyer. And then he apparently paid off the police chief in Kittery, Maine. And that's how it stayed open. And so law enforcement, I know, has come a long way. I've been doing anti-trafficking work for about 12 years. And I know law enforcement has come a long way. And that, okay, there's always a few bad apples in the bunch, but they do so much now to help victims exit and give them services and go after the buyers and the traffickers, where back in the day, you were the prostitute, you were the one that was going to be arrested, and so your trafficker always banked on that fact, that you're the criminal, not them. And so you also believed that, so you also felt very trapped. And you also didn't want to be a rat, because you were trained not to have a snitch. So you're just caught in this cycle of like never being able to really escape. And I was there for a solid 2 years in Maine, and my trafficker was making so much money. He had tons of other women that he was exploiting. He'd meet them at nightclubs, strip clubs. He'd go away on bike week, come home with random girls that he'd meet in different states. Anywhere he could find vulnerable women, he would. And they were my wife-in-laws. He'd pit us against each other. We'd fight. He'd beat each other. He'd beat us in front of each other. Just all types of crazy mental and emotional stuff to keep us always on edge. I had tons of unhealthy coping skills. I saw my primary care doctor probably 2, maybe 3 times a month during my entire time of trafficking. I was tagged as a DV victim because I had all types of issues like bruising and head damage, migraine, headaches I couldn't get rid of. My body was physically reacting to the stress. I had a lump in my throat that never went away. I was really thin. I had eating disorder, tattoo with my trafficker's name on it, breast implants. You name it, I had it. ADD, ADHD, anxiety, depression, like whatever I could self-diagnose myself for meds, and they just write me the scripts. And thank goodness I never got addicted to anything, because it probably would have been harder for me to get out. And I just constantly was trying to escape, but just never was able to achieve that. And after these 2 years of being in Maine, he made so much money. To give you an idea, my only one healthy, good coping skill was to journal. I managed to write everything I was going through in a journal, a bunch of journals, and I saved them so he couldn't find it. And I'd write down how much money I made. Then in 1 month, I made $28,000. Just one woman, that much money. And he had all these other women, so he talked me into going to college to get a business degree. So I left college in the beginning when, I first met him, but now he's like, go to college and get a business degree so we can open a business as a front. He wanted to run all of his money through it. So I actually went through Bunker Hill Community College while being trafficked, paid for all my classes with cash, made the dean's list, straight A's, made no friends except for one guy who wanted to marry me on American citizenship. And I said, no, that's not enough money, and you're gonna get me killed. Can we not be friends? And I graduate, and I don't feel any ounce of pride or accomplishment, because I can't. I don't feel anything. I'm completely numb. But this degree made me feel some type of accomplishment somewhere in there. And I thought, okay, he might not give me everything he's promising, but he can't take that away. So I held on to that. I started working out. Like I said, I had eating disorders, all types of things. And I was going to a Gold's Gym. I think it was in Somerville. I lived in Everett at the time. And there was a boxing ring in the back of the gym. And I just wandered in there one day and I started hitting the punching bag. And I meet a Mexican old school boxer, trainer with no teeth. And he noticed that I obviously had problems. And he saw a black eye one time and he's like, girl, I'm gonna teach you to bob and weave. You're never gonna have a black eye again. And I was like, okay. And he didn't ask questions, he just taught me how to fight. And you know what? I started getting stronger, slowly but surely. And I started fighting back. I fought back in the first place, but now I was really fighting back. And by this time, I was on a mission. I didn't care. He was gonna die, I was gonna die, someone was dying, and I don't care who it is, but I'm done. And so more time would go on. Maine ends up getting busted. There was an underage girl there. I didn't recognize, I knew she looked young. She's your typical story. She was between 12, I think she was 12 or 14. She was a runaway from the foster care system, but she had an aunt who was looking for her. And we know how big and broken and overloaded the system is and how many of those kids fall through the cracks and end up in the trade because no one's looking for them and they go missing. But this young girl had an aunt and she kept calling, and the club had money laundering issues. The owner died, they had all types of problems, the feds got involved, they did a 2-year surveillance, and I had a sense that the place was gonna get busted. So my trafficker allowed me to leave only because Craigslist became popular. And we know, do you remember the Craigslist killer? Right, that was a thing, because now you're out of the safety of a massage parlor, out of a brothel, and you're going in homes and hotels and people's houses and businesses. Way more dangerous, violent, insane, disgusting type of things happen because the prostitution is inherently violent and it does deep, deep soul damage. You don't go to bed at night and are proud or feel accomplished about everything that you did that day. You just don't. Great, you might have made $1,000, but you feel disgusted. It just doesn't ever even out. Or you might, that high might last for a day. Your pimp might take you shopping, and all of a sudden you're on his good side and you feel all accomplished and great, but it's a hard crash, and there's a lot to pay for that. And so this constant roller coaster, these constant up and downs, and Craigslist was, and all other adult websites was horrific. And I was all over New England, even trafficked through the legal system in Nevada. He had me out, I don't forget, it was the chicken or the bunny ranch, but I was there to Florida, high price escorting, back up to New England, where a sex buyer of Craigslist called me, and I went to his house, and nothing happened. And he paid me a lot of money. And then week after week, he would continue to call me back, and I'd go there, and we'd hang out and watch SpongeBob. I'm not joking. And I liked this guy because he was friendly and he wasn't touching me and he was funny, and somewhere in my head he became safe, and he was from East Boston, he was an Italian guy, and I just kept him quietly. My trafficker obviously had no idea. It was like a reprieve. And research says that when a woman's ready to leave the commercial sex trade, she needs one safe, supportive person to reach out to. So this guy became my safe person, unbeknownst to me. So here I am, almost 5 years in, I have the college degree, all this money, and I get pregnant with my trafficker's child. And he forced me to terminate the pregnancy. And so a lot of traffickers I know have their women have their children because it's more control, and they bring the children right into the situations. But this dude was forcing me to terminate, and I didn't want to. I already had an abortion when I was 18, another story. But I was so deeply crushed that everything he promised, I realized at that moment was probably not going to come true. Like, I'm not going to retire, I'm not going to have the family, the business, the baby. Everything he promised is not going to come true. And you can use me and abuse me for all these years, but to take a life, I was like, I'm done. So I started saving money without him noticing. Even if he wasn't there, I was so trained to put the money in a certain place. I started taking a few hundred off the top, put it in Ziploc bags, tie elastics around it real tight, and I put it in the dirt in my potted plants because I wanted to save a few grand so I get my own apartment. But how does a woman who's been in the commercial sex trade 5 years, 10 years, walk into a real estate agency and fill out an application? We can't. And that's the purpose, right? We have no job, no reference, tons of debt, never mind, mental health, substance use issues, children to take care of, criminal records, felony charges, all the things. And the door gets that much further away because that's what it's designed to do. But God's grace on my life, the SpongeBob guy owned a small business. He owned a corner store in East Boston. And I said, hey, I'm in a lot of trouble. You don't know my story. That's not my name. Can you lie and say that I work for you? I need pay stubs. He said, sure, you can be the bookkeeper. Hilarious, because I can't do math to save my life. And so I'm the bookkeeper, and I get the apartment. Okay, easy, right? You got the cash, you got the stuff to prove it, you get the apartment. But now, do you think my pimp's going to help me pack and help me move? No, right? I can't leave with the granite and the leather and the jewelry and the things. I'm leaving with nothing. That's the other problem, why we stay so long. Because think about, you've done all that for all those years, and you're walking away with nothing. That is very hard to do. And I was determined. I called the cops. I said, hey, my boyfriend's going to get mad. Can you hang out on the porch? So the cops stood here. My trafficker stood there. I leave with 2 trash bags, nothing. My cat and my dog, because he didn't want them anyway. And there was a car. All the cars were in my name. I get in one of them, drive away to my big empty apartment. Cop doesn't follow me. Probably would have been helpful, but I don't know. Maybe offered me domestic violence support. I don't know. I don't know. I get there, I'm suicidal, I'm hopeless, I don't know how to put my life together. I call my mother, because again, I have a mother. How many women who are trapped in this lifestyle have nobody to call? And my mom doesn't ask me questions, she just bought me some furniture and she tried to help me put it together. I mean, her mental illness was so severe that she just always stuck her head in the sand. Like she just could not deal with any of this. She saw black eyes, she saw bruising, she saw the insanity of my life, but like she couldn't ask me the right questions. But when I needed her, she showed up, right? So a few weeks go by, and what do? What do you think I do? I call him back. Oh, she's like, no, you did that, right? Of course I did. Because that's what we do. Trauma bond, Stockholm syndrome, right? We don't know how to do life without. This is part of, we're bonded. And I know there's rules to this game. If I prostitute on my own, I'm a renegade. He finds me, he'll kill me. Or I choose another pimp, but I know how much more violent he's going to be than this guy. So let me stick to what I know. I'll live here, you live there. I'll give you a cut of the money. Have all your girls there. Just keep me out of it, and we'll call it a day. Well, my genius plan does not work, and more time goes on. He breaks the glass door to my apartment, a lot of blood, fight, typical situation. But this time, I called 911, which was courage. And they come and they arrest him for domestic violence. I get a restraining order. He doesn't show up to contest it, and it sticks. And because a piece of paper, I was causing too much heat, drama, he wanted nothing to do with it. Where a lot of pimps don't care about a piece of paper, right? They're coming after you regardless. They left me alone, and I try to put my life together. I go work as a secretary, 9 to 5. That is a joke. Like, I was falling asleep at the desk. I couldn't talk to regular people. I had no idea how to not hustle, right? Every guy looked like a dollar sign, right? At the end of the month, I can't pay my bills. I feel stressed. I have like no idea how to put my life together, and I'm hanging out with all these new friends, my big empty apartment, and they're all partying, drinking, drugging, and enter in OxyContin. And I was like, well, this is a whole lot better than therapy. Like, it was just numbing all the pain. And I did not want to be addicted to drugs. I can say I doubt anybody really wants to get addicted to drugs. We just want the pain to go away, right? Just can someone please take the pain away? And that's what OxyContin did. And it pushed me right back into the life of prostitution. Not with a pimp, with a growing drug habit. And from my work in the anti-trafficking and working with women, I know how closely linked substance use is to exploitation, right? You're either addicted before you get into prostitution, you're addicted while you're in, or you're addicted on the way out. It's just so, so closely linked and so very common. And life would unravel. I'd be homeless. I'd be sleeping on park benches. I'd be a heroin addict. I'd be overdosing in Dunkin' Donut bathrooms, more trauma, et cetera, a few more years out there. And the most compassionate people were always the EMTs. And they'd knock me and wake me up from an overdose and look at me and say, "What are you doing here?" Or like something like, "Go home." And I used to think, what am I doing here? I don't know. It's been almost a decade. How do I go home? Where is it? And how do I get there? Right? Like it just felt so far reached. And so more time would go on, and I had one sibling, a brother, and unfortunately he was sexually abused as a child. No one ever did anything about it, and he lived a life just looking for relief in some way. And we became very similar. We lived very parallel lives. He became a male prostitute. He traveled all over the world. He made tons of money. He contracted HIV, homosexuality, MDMA, ecstasy, drugs, crystal meth, etc. It just came with his lifestyle. And he was tired. And at 36, he passed away from a drug overdose, which led me to take a good look at myself. Because I said, I'm going to die. My mother's going to have no kids. She's already mentally ill. I have to do something to get clean and sober. So it took me many attempts for a long time, in and out of treatment. The biggest thing about drug recovery is that we don't want to surrender. We don't want to turn our will over. We don't want to give it all up. It's too difficult. And when you're finally sick and tired, and being sick and tired, and you're done, you're done. And I went into my last treatment center, actually down in Plymouth at High Point Treatment Center, and I had one of the best counselors in there. Somehow, this guy is still there to this day. He's the best guy. He caught wind of my story, and he just looked at me and said, "You don't have to ever sell yourself again." And he looked me in the eyes compassionately and said that, and I thought, wow, I maybe I don't. And I knew if I put down the drugs, prostitution had to be put down, everything had to change. Because I knew if I prostituted, like innately, like I knew if I went out and prostituted, I was going to get high. Like I just knew that was going to go together. And so finally got clean, sober, off the streets in September of 2007. I don't know, it's been like almost 18 years. I can't do math, I told you. It's been a long time. And during those early few months, I was doing the 12 steps, AANA, and I met an old lady who was a church lady, and she was known to take girls off the street. I was running in Charlestown, and she was known to take girls off the street to church. And she took me to a Pentecostal church. I don't know if anyone, there's like no one, have you been to a Pentecostal church? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. Okay, all right. Okay. They were all happy. Let's just say that. They were full of joy and love and happiness. And I was like, what do these people have? Like, I just wanted it, right? Because I was desperate. And they didn't freak me out. I just wanted what they had. And before we go home, I'm in the backseat of her car in the church parking lot. And I'm surrounded by the old church ladies. They're probably like in their 60s, 70s. And I'm in the backseat. And she turns around and she says, "Honey, do you want to know how much Jesus loves you and he can forgive you and wash you clean?" And I said, "Yes, who is he?" And at that moment, right, I accept Jesus in the backseat of a car, and I think how appropriate, because I've done a lot of unholy things in the backseat of a car. But I fell in love with this God who met me right where I was at, because I didn't have to clean up first, right? I didn't have to be perfect. And time will go on. So I became a Christian, gave my life to the Lord, and just stuffed everything else and tried to put my life together one day at a time. And then I got married. And I always say, if you want your trauma to come out, get married, because that's a good way to make it do that. And I could write a whole nother book. We could have a whole nother talk about my 18 years or so in recovery, married, children, separation, divorce, remarry, same guy. We have 5 kids all together. I live in Nashua now. I've literally become that crunchy granola, drive a minivan, have chickens in my backyard, homeschool a few of my young kids. Like, who am I? Soccer mom, no idea who I have become. But it's been a long, wild journey. And like I said, I've been doing this about 12 years in anti-trafficking, and I only kept sharing my story because I recognized that so many other women have the same story. No matter where I went to share it, whether it was, you know, in a church setting, to a school, to healthcare, law enforcement, the United Nations, wherever the Lord has taken me, women would come up with tears streaming down their face, telling me I have the same story, but I'm too ashamed to talk about it. And so I started to recognize that link between shame and keeping us sick, and all those women in drug treatment programs needed someone to tell them there was a better way. So I filled up these bags with toiletries, soap, shampoo, conditioner, toothpaste, get in my minivan, drive around Lynn, because I find the women on the streets in Lynn easy, and I'd get out of the car and I'd give them the bag, tell them there's a better way, tell them I love them, and wrote my number down and said if they needed help to call. Well, it's been 12 years. We give out over 1,000 bags of hope each year. It's all filled by the community. People donate all the items, fill the bags. I guess you could call me a missionary in that sense. I raise all my support. I don't take any state or federal funding to do the work that I do. And just 2 years ago, we were able to open up our own home for women exiting. So for many years, we'd send women across the country to different safe homes. We'd pay for the bus fare, the airline ticket. We'd actually handheld women all the way to the safe house in a different state. But just 2 years or 3 years ago, I was contacted by a couple who purchased a 17-bedroom Catholic retreat center that went on the market when the nuns retired. And they wanted to partner with a ministry, and they interviewed all these ministries around New England, and they chose me. And I was on Zoom, and I thought confetti was going to fall from my ceiling. I thought the Publishers Clearinghouse was going to come in my front door with a $300,000 check, like, you know, because now I went from raising maybe $60,000 a year to $300,000-$400,000 a year on my own in that sense. Again, private grants, donations. We've been open for about 2 years. We have current 3 residents and 2 full-time staff, 1 part-time. We'd take more residents if we'd have more staff. I don't want to just shove 17 women and or children in this place. I want to take care of them well, obviously. So they can stay for up to 2 years free of charge as they work on their healing and recovery through our program that I've designed. And we just got chickens, like, right, everyone's got chickens. You come to New Hampshire, you got chickens. And they're doing really well because they're learning so much about their healing and their trauma from early childhood. It's like the onion, right? And they're unfolding everything, job readiness. You know, some, they come in, they haven't been to the dentist in 10 years, right? They don't have a GED, they don't have their license. All the documents, all the things have to get put in order. Go back to college, whatever they want to do. I just want them to come in, relax for a second, decompress, and start dreaming. And we also have a social enterprise that's connected to it, where they can start making products. So we pay them a small stipend. They're making, I brought a few items in the back table, hand-sewn items, soaps, jewelry, and they're having a great time. And every time I go speak somewhere, I bring all the items. Usually I bring the women, and we sell all their stuff, and it's exciting and great. And then my book is also back there. Did I mention that I wrote a book? Probably not. So it's called The Diary of Jasmine Grace. Remember those journals I told you about? Right. So I was able to keep all those journals at my parents' house. And years ago, I just felt led to go back into the journals and blog exactly what was written. And it was difficult and it was hard, but I had a good counselor. I had good, safe, supportive people in my life at the time. And I'd blog exactly what was written, and I'd put a present-day reflection to show who I am today and how to best serve survivors. And women from all over the country would start reaching out, telling me they had the same story, that I was helping them, and so I just kept going. And it took about 2 years, and then I was able to compile it into a book. So it's pretty powerful for people that haven't survived, because you understand the mind of a victim, and then you give it to a woman who maybe has been through this, and all of a sudden the lights go on, right? And she can start realizing, oh, I'm not crazy. This is a thing, and I can't believe this is what's happened to me. So it puts a lot of words to what they've experienced. So I don't know how I did. 6:47, I busted all that out there. Thank you so much for your time and attention. If you want to ask questions now or later, I'm here. Sure. Living Hope Farms. Right. And so I don't have, my website is jasminegrace.org, and that's how. Yes, Living Hope Farms. And my brochure and information is back there, if you ever want to refer any women in as well.
Thank you, Jasmine, for putting everything into perspective. Before we move on, does anybody have any questions? Okay, so I would like to have our panelists come and introduce themselves before we get started. Christy? Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christy McDougall. I'm the Community Outreach Director for the Norfolk District Attorney's Office, but also the Norfolk Advocates for Children.
Good evening. I'm Michael Tewitt. I'm a detective with the Randolph Police Department. I am also a member of the FBI Human Trafficking Task Force based out of Chelsea.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Marcus Pooley. I'm the CSEC Statewide Program Manager for the Massachusetts Children's Alliance.
And my name is Farah Lewis. I am a human trafficking advocate with Family and Community Resources. So I guess the big question everyone kind of wants to know that Jasmine helped us put into perspective is, what is human trafficking and how do we recognize it? So from your personal professional experience, how do you define human trafficking, not just by law, but how it actually shows up in real life?
So should we just go down the line? Yeah. All right. So through our perspective, through the DA's office, through the Child Advocacy Center, we see a lot of exchanges or transactions for a sexual gesture or act.
Simple terms, consider it someone who takes advantage of someone's vulnerability, status, make them do things so that they can earn money or services for themselves.
Yeah, so as I mentioned in my title, CSEC. CSEC stands for Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children, so I specifically look at the under 18 population, and Massachusetts law defines a sexually exploited child as anyone who's under the age of 18 who engages, agrees to engage, or is offered to engage in any sexual act in exchange for something of value. So just even the simple solicitation of someone under 18 to engage in an act constitutes that child's been sexually exploited. To kind of move back away from the law, as Jasmine had talked about, it's taking advantage of someone's vulnerabilities, right? So whether it's a child or an adult, where someone is looking at another person and seeing, they have a history of child abuse, they need something. When we're looking at kids who run away from home, they need shelter, they need food, they need somewhere to sleep. The exploiter is coming in and taking advantage of that need. And on top of the grooming and manipulation, they just continue to maintain that control over the person. I will note that for children, anyone who's under 18, you don't need force, fraud, or coercion. So a child could, quote unquote, be willingly engaging in it. They're under 18, their frontal lobes are still developing. They have like 10 years to go until it's fully developed. So it doesn't matter if a kid looks like they're agreeing to engage in it or not. They're a sexually exploited child, and we can get further into the conversation about what services are available for them.
Thank you, Marcus, especially for mentioning those vulnerabilities. So speaking of vulnerabilities, what type of trafficking do you guys most encounter when you guys do encounter cases of sex trafficking, whether it be sex or labor? What do you guys see most often?
We most often see sex trafficking. Oftentimes it comes through the internet, social medias. That's how these youth are meeting their pimps. We have seen familial trafficking and labor trafficking, but most often sex trafficking.
As a police officer, sometimes we see it calls for services. We started seeing a lot dealing with juvenile runaways. Started seeing a lot with our hotels, some of our businesses in towns. A lot of it is derived by calls for service or it's reported to us in my phase. She mentioned how things have changed now, where we're a lot more proactive. We're actually out discovering more because we're looking for it, as opposed to just having it fall into our laps.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I work for Mass Children's Alliance. We're the membership organization of the 12 children's advocacy centers here in Massachusetts. So I don't directly work with families or youth who've experienced exploitation, but from our membership, which includes our Norfolk partners, often, CSEC comes in couple different forms. It can be anything from family-controlled trafficking, survival, sex, peer-facilitated exploitation, and more increasingly online exploitation. So the exchange of CSAM, child sexual abuse material, being traded online over Snapchat, Instagram for some sort of fee or anything else of value. And we're often seeing that these cases intersect with other experience. So, youth who are missing from care, system involved, have some gender or sexuality identification, and foster care. So we're seeing a lot of intersections, but more increasingly with these online cases, we're not seeing those intersections. It's just a youth who has a phone and someone who approaches them online and asks for a picture, and the child sends it, whether it's another peer or an adult. We're increasingly seeing that with the online space, but are kind of more quote-unquote traditional cases that are happening in person, where you see a lot of those intersections with those vulnerabilities.
Marcus, with the online space, you had mentioned that that's something you guys are seeing a little bit more. This can go out to any one of you on the panel. How do you guys address, how does your agency address, what do you guys currently do to address human trafficking, especially when it's like happening online, when it's not, easily visible? Like, how do you address that?
Is this for me? Okay, yeah, I can start. So like I mentioned, we're the membership organization, so we try to provide a lot of training and technical assistance and training opportunities for those multidisciplinary team members, so our law enforcement partners, Department of Children and Families, the CAC staff. This online space is ever changing, and with the AI now, really at the forefront, we are fighting an ever rising tide in this space. So making sure that we're holding those trainings, making them accessible to people, keeping them online, virtual, hybrid, no fee, to just get people that information, has really been a cornerstone that we've tried to do at Mass Children's Alliance, to make sure that the people on the front lines have the information that they need to best execute their jobs. You can't look into a cyber-based crime if you don't know the intricacies around Snapchat, right? So we try to make sure that those trainings are available to the multidisciplinary team partners.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I don't work on cases really much at all. I sit with victims afterwards with my dog and hope that she could give them love and comfort. But I do provide trainings to the county. So I cover recognizing and responding to child abuse, and it covers CSEC. It covers all the forms of abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, physical abuse, commercial sexual exploitation of children, and I reach out to mandated reporters. I reach out to caregivers. I'm constantly looking for different forms of training and education that I could provide not only to professionals, but to community members, to really strengthen knowledge, strengthen resources, and let people know where they should go if something happens. So if something does happen and we suspect that a child is being exploited, the child, or a mandated report needs to be made, police need to be contacted, and then we go ahead and form a team together. But I think that's a further question, so I'll zip for now.
What does a mandated report look like? Just curious for those who don't know.
So a mandated report, often referred to as a 51A, is a report made to DCF, Department of Children and Families, DYS, whatever you may call it. So it's essentially a piece of paper with your information, the child's information, and what's happening. So that report is added to, is a 51A. But if DCF has records of that child, it gets added to their 51B. So I like to say when reports are made to DCF, you're adding to a piece of their puzzle of their overall investigation. So I might have information that Detective Tuitt might not have, and vice versa. So when he makes a report and I make that report, we could only aid in that overall investigation and help support that child, their family, and the team working for that child and their family.
Thank you, Christy. And Detective, I actually have a question specifically for you. So when we're doing all those collaborations, what are some of the limitations that you personally have as a police officer within the field?
I'm going to try to put both questions together with that one. I think we talked about the online, and I think recognition is huge, and which comes with the trainings. And just keep in mind, we have police officers that may not recognize certain things that might be in human trafficking. So training in the academy, we have to go to academy every year. When we get courses like that, now all police officers are getting a little better or getting a little more information to understand it. I've done some trainings for the schools, which surprisingly, a lot of them have never had any type of training recognizing signs of human trafficking, and they're around the kids all the time. So I think the training is extremely important in getting the information out there. That's number one. Your second question was?
Like, what are some of the limitations that you see or encounter?
So some of the limitations, one of the biggest one are juveniles. I think it was 2018, there was juvenile reform laws put into place. I think one of the most difficult, especially amongst police officers, is if I have a 14-year-old girl, let's say outside of a hotel, and she doesn't want to communicate, or I'll add she's out missing at the time. There's laws that kind of prohibit us from basically taking that 14-year-old and placing her in custody or him in custody. So way before that, if you're out missing, we put you in a police car, we take you to the police station. We can't do that like we were able before. And then we'd have to explain to a parent, oh yeah, I came across your daughter. We tried to keep her, but she ran. You know what I mean? So there's some difficulties in there with law enforcement, basically to help that child at the moment. There are some ways, I mean, training and speaking and verbal judo to try to keep the child there long enough to contact the parent, or DCF. If you can do that, it's a win. But again, if you even get her to a police station, she runs out that door, we're just starting a little bit of a cycle again.
So I think this is a good time to talk about that team. After I was like, oh no, we're going to talk about it later. I think this is a great time to talk about that team. So we form a multidisciplinary team, and Savannah in the back of the room is our CSEC coordinator. So Savannah is the forefront, and once she receives, so what happens when you suspect that a child is being exploited, that child's, a child's being exploited, someone makes a mandated report or contacts the police, and then the police will make that mandated report. Savannah's contacted. So what happens then as a CSEC coordinator is Savannah is creating a multidisciplinary team. So on that team, I'm just looking at my notes so I don't forget anyone because it's a lengthy list. We have a pediatric SANE nurse. We have a mental health coordinator. We have a victim witness advocate, who is Savannah as well. We have an assistant district attorney. We have a forensic interviewer, a detective, some form of police personnel, and DCF. Oftentimes, the kids don't even know that there's a full team working behind them to support them. So that could be a limitation within working with these kids. But we gather that team together, and we don't, Savannah does, but they gather that team together and talk about what does this child need right now? How can we support the child? Does it even make sense to have that child come in, do a forensic interview? Could we take criminal charges out? Does that child need food, shelter, water? What are these basic needs for the child? So sometimes we need to address the child's basic needs before we even address the criminal matters. So really meeting the kids where they're at is a huge thing that we have to do as a multidisciplinary team.
And if I could just piggyback off that, so the multidisciplinary team response is research-driven best approach to these cases, right? But unfortunately, one limitation with them is when the child turns 18, what happens? And what happens is 90% of the team goes away. And you are leaving this person who one day before had access to all of these professionals, the next day has law enforcement, and that's it basically, right? So that is a huge limitation to it, and we're really trying to expand our transitional age services for youth and incorporate that into the MDT response, and kind of making a plan for this child, even if they're not ready for it yet, right? So making sure that those services are at least written down and they have it on a piece of paper so they know who to call, even if it's not today or tomorrow or the next day. But that is certainly a challenge that the CACs face and the MDTs face, is what happens when that child turns 18 and what services are no longer available for them at that point.
Can I actually add on to that, Marcus? So here at Family Community Resources, I run the Trafficking Awareness and Prevention Program, and our purpose is to actually bridge that gap. So for those who are 18, coming out of the DCF system, we were the ones who are able to provide services for them, because we have, like Marcus said, there isn't any resources for those just leaving the life 18 and up. Yes.
You guys are wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Helped us.
Yes. Thank you.
I just-
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, I just, one short image. We talked about, I'll just give you a scenario, finding a victim, now we got them. Let's say we got them on the law enforcement side. And we talked about the team now that recent years, past years really never existed. So once we are able to, let's say, get that victim to, let's say, trust us, then we have the next step of phase, whether DCF, whether part of this group, to help all the way along. Point I'm trying to make is if there's gaps, that leaves the opportunity for that victim to go back. And so it's important that with the team that we have set up, that it's consistent and available, so that we don't lose that victim once we get them on the path to get help.
Thank you, Detective. Marcus, you mentioned earlier that anyone under 18 in commercial sexual exploitation is automatically a victim, no such thing as a child prostitute. So with that being said, what rights and protections do survivors have access to?
Yeah, of course. So in Massachusetts, we passed our comprehensive human trafficking law in 2012. We were the third last in the country to pass a human trafficking law. And even though we were the third last, we took a really long time to get there. We did a really good job with it. It was very comprehensive. So as I had mentioned, that law defines what a sexually exploited child is. It also says that sexual exploitation is child abuse. So if we're defining this victimization as child abuse, what does that mean? It means that social welfare or child welfare needs to respond, right? So our DCF partners need to respond. And if DCF is responding, law enforcement should also probably respond, right? So the law mandates by law that any child who is experiencing sexual exploitation or is suspected to, a multidisciplinary team consisting of law enforcement, the DCF, and a representative from the district attorney's office must respond to those concerns in a comprehensive manner. So, like I said, took us a long time to get there, but we did a very good job doing it, and that came through that on the ground movement, informing that. So each kid who experiences exploitation in Massachusetts has the opportunity to engage with a multidisciplinary team. As I'd mentioned, we have 12 CACs in Massachusetts, and those CACs cover the entire state. So literally any child in Massachusetts who's experiencing exploitation has access to services through that CAC and that multidisciplinary team, everywhere from Provincetown to Pittsfield. So they have that protection. Also in that law, there's some language around, again, shifting the narrative to saying that these children are victims, not prostitutes, are some provisions for them not to be charged with prostitution-related offenses, or if they are, they could be deferred and further down the line. So we really did a good job with that in Massachusetts. There's a lot of other kind of more nuanced protections for human trafficking victims in general, such as T visas, if there's any immigration status issue, problems there. There's a lot in place. There's a lot of information. I could probably spend the rest of the night talking about protections, and I don't want to keep you here all night long, but if you have any kind of specific concerns around protections that are available for someone with a specific need, feel free to ask me afterwards.
Thank you, Marcus. Christy, we already kind of touched up on that earlier with the MDT, but what if you don't know whether or not there are a child involved, or if you don't know if it's the parent per se that's abusing the child? Do you still file a 51A? Because I've heard stories of a doctor was like, well, you know, there was a child who was clearly in a abusive situation, but there was no 51A filed because the parent was not the one abusing them. What do we do in that situation?
Yep, so when in doubt, file. I just say file over everything, especially when you have any suspicion that a child's being harmed. If you think a child's being harmed, you can make a mandated report, a 51A, on an unknown child, because like I said before, I might have information that Detective 2 doesn't have, and so on and so forth, but I might have the child's last name, he might have the child's first name, and just because it's not a caregiver, a report still needs to be made because it gets sent to the DA's office. So even non-child exploitation cases, if it meets a certain criteria, that referral made to DCF gets sent to our office, and we still form that MDT response for that child. So oftentimes, like if there's any teachers in this room or any other mandated reporters in this room, you might make a DCF report, and they might say, oh, screened out because it might be kid on kid. That doesn't mean that that report's going into the trash. Like, we still have eyes on that. We're still going to take that MDT response, and we're still going to make sure that child gets the help that they need. So even if the alleged abuser isn't a caregiver, it still needs to be filed on, even if it might be like a cousin or it might be a friend at school. Any form of suspected abuse should be filed on.
And just to add one thing too, for CSEC cases, so for a sexually exploited child, not only does the alleged abuser not need to be a parent, you don't need to know who it is. You can file it as an unknown, so you can allege sexual exploitation of Jane Doe by an unknown, and that still can be screened in and a response done. Because again, to your point, the DA's office may have more information that the mandated reporter might not know, and can make those connections happen. And with CSEC cases, you can file for if the child's at risk for exploitation, so they don't need to be actively experiencing exploitation. It can be in their past. They could be having risk factors or indicators for it. You can file for that as well. That'll maybe get screened out by DCF, but services can be put in place to hopefully prevent active exploitation from happening.
Thank you, thank you. And so we're going to move on to a topic that I feel like a lot of people are definitely interested in with this topic is cyber safety and digital exploitation. So can you guys explain to me what exactly is digital grooming, and how can we distinguish between normal adolescent behavior and potential red flags?
Gosh, I don't want to go first.
So I spoke about a training that I did for the, actually, let me explain this training real quick. So I've been trying to get training in the schools in Randolph, and I was able to present the training to the school staff, the management staff. A few weeks later, they allowed me to do a training for the teachers. My goal was the staff, management staff, teachers. My goal is the parents. And then my final goal is the parents who want to bring their children in. And I say children because there's no one better than a friend of a girl being trafficked that can probably tell you what's going on and hopefully tell someone and it gets reported. But part of the learning that training that I put together was, we could go from PlayStation, PS4, to communications that they're using with each other that most parents aren't aware. Some parents probably don't even know you could communicate with someone else. But those headphones and everything, there's a whole little world out there of communication. The social media apps. We deal with a lot of photos being sent amongst children as far as elementary school. And you talk about the grooming. If someone gets a hold of one of those pictures, what's the one thing the child doesn't want? So someone presents them with, well, I won't show anyone this picture if you do this. Okay, so I think the training part of that, or parents or teachers and everyone being aware that it exists and how they're communicating is important.
Yeah, I think when we're, oh. Okay. I think when we're talking about the digital space, we can kind of lump it into two buckets, peer-to-peer and then adult-to-peer, right? So peer-to-peer, we're thinking of Discord, we're thinking of Snapchat oftentimes, and it's just, you know, it's the way children talk to each other these days, right? There is no changing that. I went to a training one long time ago, and the presenter said, cell phones are the world to kids, right? They are how they see the world. They are the lens that they view the world. You don't fix the problem by taking the phone away from them. You fix the problem by establishing lines of communication with them about, you know, safe behavior, and establishing yourself as a tried and true safe person for them to come to if something happens. And, you know, that peer-to-peer, there's normal sexual behaviors for kids to have at every single stage from, you know, toddler to 18 years old. There's normal behaviors, and then there's problematic and abnormal behaviors. And that kind of abnormal behaviors is where we start to look at when we get concerned as professionals, because that's, you know, an image being sent to another peer, and then, you know, there's threats to post that on the internet, or on a, you know, whatever, a forum, if the person doesn't give them $500 or something like that. We call that sextortion cases. So we tend to look at that. And the same can be said when we're looking at, you know, a child and adult online grooming, right? So maybe it's an actual adult who's posing as an adult, maybe it's an adult who's posing as a child, but they kind of gain the trust of that child, and then, you know, images are exchanged. And again, it could be the same thing where I'm going to send this to your mom if you don't keep sending me pictures. I'm going to send this to all your friends if you don't keep sending me more pictures, or send me money, or do this, or meet me in person. You know, the online space, again, to youth is how they view the world, and they often don't have that lack of trust that I think we did when we interacted in just the world without electronics, right? Prior to my position that I'm in now, I used to work in the direct service work in Plymouth County. I led their CSEC responses, and we had a case one time where the youth started talking with who they thought was another child on Snapchat. They thought they were around 16 or 17 years old, and 15 minutes later, they're outside waiting for someone, and its adult picks them up, right? 15 minutes. That's how long it took for that interaction on Snapchat to lead to an in-person contact offense that happened, you know, subsequently after that. So it's a huge scope. There's a kind of a spectrum of behaviors that are happening in the digital space, and can kind of be divvied up if we're talking about peer-to-peer or a child and adult. And it's a lot, right? It's a lot for parents. It's a lot for grandparents raising grandkids as well. That's a huge population that is looking for information that just doesn't know what to do in this space. My suggestion as service providers, as parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, whoever you are to a child, is to just try and stay up on top of it the best that you can. Go on these websites, learn, you know, what the style of communication is on there. Can something be traded on there? Oftentimes, Roblox, there's Robux. So you purchase them with real money, but it's currency in the game. That can be exchanged to the chat, and in the chat, pictures can be sent, right? So it's something that, you know, I often would tell grandparents raising grandkids that if they had the ability to go on the iPad and look at, you know, Discord or whatever, and just go through it and just see what their grandkid or whoever child in their life, what they're looking at, right? And then from there, call me back and we can talk about what you're concerned about, or want to know more information about. So just kind of having that hands-on experience is kind of the best way to start about it. And then one last final thing, because I think I've been talking for like 10 minutes now, is when we're talking about grooming as service providers, about CSEC, about sex trafficking, it's scary language, right? When we're saying, oh, your kid is being trafficked online, when they send pictures and are now, you know, being asked to send more and more pictures. So we can think of it, and the way I think of it too, especially when we're trying to get into schools and talk to parents, because it's really hard to go to a school and say, hey, I want to talk to all your parents about kids being sex trafficked in your town. Kind of scary, right? You know, so kind of softening the language. You know, about kids who can be exploited on the internet, right? So you're being taken advantage of on the internet. Is language that's a little bit more digestible for us as, you know, I think just as humans, right? We like to think that this stuff doesn't happen. We know that it does happen, but sometimes using that softened language can get people to the table a little bit easier.
Thank you, Marquise. You kind of drew us right into the next question. So with that being said about how, parents, schools, organizations, and families, how do we navigate the internet safely and confidently? You kind of already addressed that. But at what age should we start talking to children about online safety and trafficking? What's appropriate? What do we to tell a child?
I can start.
Sure.
I think, obviously it depends on your relationship with the child. If you're a parent, I think it's up to your discretion, but I think you should talk about it earlier than later, right? And you don't have to say, sit little Johnny down and say, hey, I want to tell you about sex trafficking, right? You can say, I want to talk about healthy boundaries with people. I want to talk about how to be safe online, right? Surely as the child matures and they get older, you can, change the language, exploitation, use the word sex, talk about it, right? Talk about what's healthy, what's unhealthy. And maybe, once they get a little bit older, or maybe they hear it from a friend, yeah, you can talk about what sex trafficking is, that's fine. But you can talk about it at a young age, just using different language, right? If you have a conversation with a 5-year-old who's on Discord and say, hey, if anyone ever asks you for a picture of yourself that maybe, where you don't have your shirt on, right? We don't do that, right? And you have a conversation like that. Whereas maybe if you're talking to someone who's an older teenager, if you're saying, hey, if someone's asking you for a nude and then asks for money after that or says they're going to send you money for it, you're having that same conversation, right? Essentially, you're just using different language that isn't so scary at that younger age, but they're still having the knowledge without maybe exposing them to the worst of this, right? I think the same goes for schools. We're still struggling to get into schools, kind of from a state lens, because people are so scared of the word of sex trafficking. So that's where I found it helpful to use kind of that softer language about internet safety, body safety, healthy relationships. And that's another thing too, healthy relationships, right? Having a conversation about if your boyfriend or girlfriend makes you feel X, Y, or Z, that's bad, right? And then you're having those conversations earlier and earlier. You're gonna be able to give them that knowledge base and build it up brick by brick as they get older. I lost my train of thought. Yeah, but for schools, other organizations, I think just having those softed conversations first to get a little, get them to the table, because it's really scary talking about this in general. We have the data to say that in every single town in this state, there has been a child who's been exploited sexually, right? It happens everywhere, but nobody wants to admit that, yeah, it happens here in Stoughton, right? It's just, you don't want to say that. You don't want to, think that that could happen to your child, or a child that you love, or a child in your family, or a child in your classroom. You don't want to think that, right? You want to think that that atrocity happens somewhere else. But just brokering the conversations first about just safe relationships, safety online, can get people to the table, and you're essentially giving them the same information.
Does anyone else want to add to that question? Yeah.
And again, I'm going to go back to the trainings, the schools, and when I did this training for the teachers, 2 cases I mentioned. One was a trafficker who we had just indicted for the 2nd time, who took a plea deal in federal court for 13 years. Okay, and one of his things was to search Facebook and Instagram and look for women that were in some type of having issues. Oh, I'm losing my apartment, or something like that. And he would reach out to those women and say, hey, let me take you out. And that was just the beginning of him getting in, let's say. And that one, but he's off the streets now. That happened this year. We talked about another case I mentioned to him was, let me back up. This kid went to Randolph High. Okay, and we had log items related to him about 18 years ago, I found, where he made comments in school towards women and got disciplinary actions taken against him way back then. And this was his 2nd federal indictment for human trafficking. Another one I mentioned was adult male in Dennis, Mass, who he was a contractor and had a big mansion. And one of the parents had mentioned her daughter going out to this guy's house for parties. And it turns out that she was being trafficked. There was a middleman involved, but her daughter had actually recruited other I'm talking 13, 14, 15-year-old girls. The gentleman would not accept any girls under the age of 16. I mean, over the age of 16. And we found out, I think we located 5 different juveniles, Quincy, Randolph, Brockton, that were all attending these house parties and getting paid. I'm talking the $1,000 checks, $500 checks for these kids that are 14 years old that they were living on. So it brought it close to home. And again, teachers, parents, if the parents are educated, the parents themselves can maybe talk to the kids.
And if I could just add one thing that I just want to bounce off one thing that you brought up. I think I unintentionally let a bias slip in my previous response. Talk to our boys too, right? Talk to them about how do you treat someone else with dignity and respect, right? So we often, I think, when we're having these conversations, we're assuming that the victims are female. A large percentage of human trafficking victims are female. Men can be victims too. So when we use gendered language like that, just know that we are including everyone. But when we're having these conversations, talk to boys too. How do you respect someone else? How do you respect yourself? How do you engage online in a safe way? How do boys, treat? We need to have those conversations with everyone. It's not just, how do you engage in a healthy relationship as a man, as a boy too? So those conversations need to happen as well. We can't just shift it all on talking to our young girls and saying, this is the red flag that you need to look out for if your boyfriend does this to you. No. Talk to the men and say, as a boyfriend, don't do this. So they need to be having those conversations too. And, that just reminded me, of the 18-year-old in high school, if you had a conversation with that boy about what healthy relationships looked like, maybe not when he was 18, maybe when he was 14 or 12 or 10, maybe that would have been different, right? Maybe he wouldn't have been recruiting these girls at this house, right? Maybe he would have, I don't know. But maybe if we have those conversations early on, even if it just prevents one person from being trafficked, it's worth it in my mind.
So, just a few years ago, the world shut down and everyone was given a device, a phone, a laptop, an iPad to talk to their classmates, to talk to their friends, to talk to their families because we were isolated. It was COVID. We had the pandemic. We couldn't leave the houses. So the only way that some of our kids could communicate with their friends is through the phone, through the tablets, through the laptops. Kids didn't really know how to talk to one another. So they built confidence online. They built this strong sense of community on the digital space, and it could have been with strangers. It could have been with their peers from school. But that makes them more vulnerable because a screen's in between them. So they're building these conversations, they're building these friendships with someone who is a classmate, but also maybe someone that they don't necessarily know. So we need to really strengthen their skills in person. How could we get them to bond with the kids their age at school in person? We really need to strengthen those social skills in real life as well as teaching them online safety, internet safety. I went to a school a few weeks ago and I built pretty good relationships throughout the town with the school. So I'm slowly but surely making it into the schools about teaching internet safety, and it was 4th and 5th graders. And I'm not going to teach them the scary sextortion terms, and if you go online, you're going to be sextorted, because that's not necessarily true. But if something happens and you're feeling uncomfortable, someone's bullying you, someone's messaging you and saying things to you that you don't like, how could we find a trusted adult? How could we talk to someone about this? What are the next steps if something like that happens to you? And I had them doing a pledge. I will, and everyone's like, I will, find my, it's just teaching them the confidence of knowing who to go to and knowing who to trust and talk to.
Thank you, Christy, and thank you to it and Marcus for bringing that up. I do actually have a question, kind of going with what you guys were saying. Are there any programs for at-risk youth or diversion programs that you guys know of? Say if a young boy is showing signs or or a young girl is showing signs that she might be exploited, are there any programs for that you know of?
If they're being exploited?
If they're being exploited or if they're at risk for being exploited.
Okay, so there's a lot of resources online. So the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has a lot of great resources for kids. Their program is called NetSmarts. It's a series of interactive games and kind of like video style, and they do it by age as well. I believe they have 3 age categories by age. I think it's like,
Yeah, and then they have into the cloud.
yeah, and then they have Into the Cloud. So what my point there is that the language that they use is different for someone who's 5 versus someone who's 17. So they intentionally make those distinctions. That's a fantastic resource. I always recommend NCMEC and NetSmarts as a resource.
Thank you.
We also have agencies like My Life, My Choice, where there's peer mentors, and Into the Cloud, and NetSmarts is the internet safety training that I use with schools. So My Life, My Choice is a good recommendation. NCMEC is an amazing organization. NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So those are 2 really great resources.
Yeah.
And I'm going to plug in family and community resources in there. We also do have a healthy relationships program funded by teens, peer leaders, so they go out and teach their peers about what it's like to be in a healthy relationship and what that looks like.
Yeah. One more thing to add. So for youth who are at risk for, as well as all of those great resources and kind of that risk-related resources, there's a lot of other resources outside of that that's going to kind of plug those holes of at risk, right? So I'll give you an example. Back when I was in direct service work, there was a youth that was severely high risk, high ACE score, was not experiencing exploitation, but was kind of exhibiting some risky behaviors online. And we had a conversation with a grandma who was raising the granddaughter, and I think it was around May. School was coming to a close, and I said, "What's the plan for the summer?" Grandma goes, "Just gonna let her kind of hang around the house." And I'm like, OMG, that's awful. This is awful. This is the worst case scenario for this kid, right? Because they're going to sit on the phone, someone's going to get a hold of them, they're going to send a picture, they're going to meet up. So I said, okay, what does the kid like to do? And they said, give me all these things. And I said, okay, let me take a look. And one of the things they'd like to do was sailing. So we contacted a summer camp and got the kid a scholarship to sailing camp for 5 days a week for the entire summer. Right? We're lowering that vulnerability. They're going to be around other kids their age. They're doing something that they love. Mandated reporters have eyes on them the whole summer. So especially with our at-risk kids, we need to look a little bit outside the box and say, okay, what's making this kid at risk right now? And trying to find something to fill that void for them.
Thank you, Marcus. Jasmine, this question is kind of directed towards you about how do we shift the narrative. How can we reduce stigma and uplift survivor voices in a way that's authentic, not fear-based or sensationalized?
I think watching real documentaries that talk about trafficking from that point of view, not sensationalized, right? Not the Taken, not, those crazy kind of movies. I've actually worked with survivors who said, oh, I watched a sex trafficking documentary on Netflix or Hulu, I think she told me. And I thought, wow, that's my life. And so she was able to put the pieces together to recognize, I think I'm a survivor of trafficking. So to actually have those kind of documentaries out there, share on social media, because everyone's on social media. So I think following organizations like you had said, the National Center, what about the National Center on Sexual Exploitation? NAC, they're in Washington, they're great, they have lots of campaigns, they have lots of things you can share on social media. Teaching our kids young, having those conversations, and I think we also have to talk about porn. I know we didn't necessarily talk about that, but I think that is really important conversation and kind of the gateway into this. And there are really good books, 2 of them that I'm thinking of, age appropriate, Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. It's a great book. You can talk to kids from 2 to 5 years old, and then you can do 5 to 12 with this Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. And it's just a way to have this conversation, to destigmatize this, and to be honest and open and transparent that it's happening, and being able to talk about it makes it not so shame-based. And then obviously survivor books. Lots of survivors have great books out there. There was another resource that we didn't mention, but this is for teenagers. It's called the Cool Aunt series. And a survivor has written this curriculum. Her name is Rachel Thomas. She's from the West Coast, and she's the cool aunt. She's cool, the cool aunt Rachel, and it's interactive. And she tells her story, and she asks questions, and they can do it on the computer, and it's a really great resource for teens.
Thank you.
Can I just add one thing to that?
Yes.
I think as, service professionals, as we try to destigmatize, we need to lift up survivors' voices. They are our kind of North Star in this movement, right? We need to listen to them. In this fight, we need to listen to our survivors. Every community has a survivor in one capacity or another. They may not, be doing this work, but if you know someone who is doing this work, listening to them in this movement, I think is really important.
Thank you, Marcus. And I know this is a pretty heavy topic, so I kind of wanted to finish off on something light and heart-filled. What is one story, this is for everyone at the table, what is one story, moment, or experience from your work that has given you hope?
I'll start. So as I mentioned, I do a lot of outreach. I'm not necessarily working on cases, so I mentioned before, I have the community resource dog. Her name's Bailey. She's a cute golden doodle, but she definitely has a big personality. So everyone's like, she's trained. I'm like, listen, the second she sits in that room with the victim, she is laying down, she is providing comfort, and she's napping right on their lap and letting them give her all the hugs that they need to. So this is actually Savannah reached out to me, and she's like, I have a victim, and I just met with her, and Christy, let me tell you, she just said that she's writing her senior thesis statement about how Bailey really impacted her life and how that emotional support really, drove her to advocate for getting comfort dogs for people who might be struggling with mental health, who might be struggling with something, and advocating for getting a comfort dog in their guidance department to help with kids going through whatever they may be going through. It's all different walks of lives. So I never really get to see a case through. I really just provide support and then the education to the counties and communities. So to hear that was really this is my why. This is why I got Bailey. This is why she's here doing the work she does. It's past her bedtime, so she's not here tonight. But it really reminded me of yes, we are doing something. We're doing something right, and we are here for the victims, and we're here to support them and change their lives. And that might look a little different for everyone, but it's a fight, and we can't stop.
Back up to when Jasmine told her story about the trafficker living with his mother. It's been having me sitting here for a while thinking about this because I live with my mother. So I'm going to get by that part real quick. I'm better now. One thing I'd say, and I think I'm going about right before I joined the FBI, I was at a hotel in Randolph. I check in with our hotels a lot. It creates a foundation for them to report, basically. And through the training, they had called and said, hey, this adult male, older male, just came in, paid for a room, walked outside, and they noticed that he walked around the building and brought a young female in the side door. I'm going to cut this story way short, but just so you understand. So I ended up calling my counterparts on Boston PD Task Force, and they had given me his name. And when I gave him the name, I'll tell you, last name was Brown. They're like, oh, we've been looking for him. They flew out here. And he had been trafficking this girl who was brought up from Texas, I believe. She was actually sold to another trafficker up here from Texas. And they had rescued her once, and the trafficker got a hold of her again, so she was back in. Real quick on my story, as I'm sitting there talking to him, another call comes into the police station about a male beating up a female in the back of the hotel. It ends up being the victim. And I remember there's a box truck that was there, and I could see their legs. And I'm walking, I should have drove, but I'm walking along the whole length of the hotel, and I could see it looks like a struggle. And as I'm getting close, they can't see me. They hear a siren coming down the main street. All of a sudden, the struggle stops. By the time the cruiser gets there, they're hugging each other. And the officer's interviewing her, and she, oh no, he's my boyfriend. I don't know, we're fine. And I'm like, separate them. They finally separate them. She was either still 17 or just turned 18 at the time. And we couldn't get a statement out of her for any, because this was her boyfriend. We talked about grooming. He had groomed her for many years. And the best we could come up with, Boston had contacted the mom or a family member and found out that she had made some type of statement, suicidal or fear statement. So, all right, Ashley remember that when we ended up sectioning her, and the whole goal of the section was to separate her from the trafficker. And I talk about the steps to keep them away, because she is one that you give that opening, she's back. We ended up moving her. She went to the hospital. We switched hospital, so the trafficker couldn't find her. She was in a place in Boston, hospital in Boston. I want to say every other day I kept in touch, visited her. She's not supposed to have any visitors. Boom, 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 just trying to get her to stay, just save her. And just to back up, we looked at the hotel video. This guy had been abusing her inside the hotel also. Right when we thought we were good, she disappeared. She got released, ran away back with the trafficker. He took her to Las Vegas. I think it was like NBA weekend or something. Brought her back. Finally, she ended up recontacting her. And she had been beating a mess and everything. And again, back from the traffic, from that point on, finally she's like, okay, I want to talk to you guys. I want to tell you what's going on. And she came. We got the statements. She stayed on board. Other thing we didn't mention earlier, we talked about the resources, family. There's one family member, we might have mentioned it. Her mother was also a big factor in having her rescued, basically, and stay out. And finally, she followed through, and I think the male, we ended up indicting him, getting 18 years, I think, was what he ended up in federal court. And on a plea. And I say plea because a lot of times with victims like this, you don't want to bring them back in front of the accuser for a court case. It's difficult. And if you can get 10 years, 15 years, we talked about the other guy talked about on a plea where the victim doesn't have to face that accuser again, it's a win. I mean, I'm assuming you guys agree it's a win. Because he's away, and she can move on with her life, or the victim can move on with their life. That was one of the cases we dealt with that. I was finally glad she finally is out and doing well.
The survivors that I work with are so resilient. I can think of all the stories, all the women that I've worked with over the years. They go back, they come, they call us back and forth, in and out, but it's okay. Like, we just plant those seeds. We plant the seeds, we love them as well as we can, we walk alongside. We can't rescue, right? Like, we just try to love and support, plant the seeds, and they might go in and out, but they usually always call back. I mean, we've lost a few along the way when I think about some stories, but one of the most recent is one of our current residents. 10 years ago, I ran a group at a halfway house in Lynn, and the purpose of my group is to help women that are trapped in early recovery, addiction, exploitation, realize they're survivors and exit that life. Because so many women get clean and sober, but they're still used to that lifestyle, they think the boyfriend, but really he's the trafficker, and they stay connected, or they keep a few sugar daddies in their back pocket. They can't pay for the bus ride or the cigarettes or whatever, so they do what they gotta do to survive, but it just creates so much shame that they relapse and they go back into the life in this cycle of exploitation, addiction, and homelessness. So I was running a group. There was a girl in there that totally, I could see, like she was gonna get it. She was just gonna get it. And she got clean, she got sober, she stayed, stuck around. She was a survivor. She became part of our team. And don't you know, just this November, her sister that had been out on the streets for 10 years finally called her and said, I'm ready. And so we went and picked her up, helped her get into treatment, and now she's a resident at the home. She's been there about 6 months. So that's one of my favorite recent stories.
Tough acts to follow. Those are such good stories. I have one story. So as I had mentioned, I used to work in direct services, and I had one kiddo. She was 14 or 15 at the time, and I got referrals for her probably every week, every other week, for months. She was missing from care. She was gang involved. There was concerns of weapons, of drugs. She went missing for a period of time. No one knew where she was. She ended up down in Florida. She was in California. She was in Las Vegas. No one knew, who she was with. We kind of suspected who. We were very, very nervous for her. And I had left that position kind of wondering what happened to her. Last week, MAC holds an annual conference, and I was there, and one of my old team members was there, and she said, oh my gosh, I have to give you an update. And I said, oh, what's up? She goes, do you remember so-and-so? And I said, of course I remember so-and-so. And she said, well, she just graduated high school. She's going to college in the fall on a full scholarship, and she's totally exited that life, and she is on her way. And we just both sat there and cried and hugged. We were just so happy because there was many nights that we wondered what would happen to her, and she made it out. She's on her way.
Thank you, everyone. This was very successful, nice and intimate.